I was in my dream job, and I was about 2 weeks in, and the manager pulled me aside, and he told me something devastating. This dream job was, I was a bagger for Alpha Beta grocery stores down in Covina, California. It had been my dream job because my brothers had worked for Alpha Beta, and it wasn't flipping burgers at McDonald's or Carl's Jr. It wasn't a job like that where a lot of my friends were doing for minimum wage. This was a union gig. And so instead of making the $3.75 an hour, I think, or $3.25 an hour that they paid in 1979, I was getting somewhere in the neighborhood of $6 an hour. And on Sundays, I'd get double time. And on holidays, I'd get triple time. I mean, this was the dream gig for somebody in high school. I felt rich for the first time in my life because I was making so much more than my friends if I worked the same hours. And my face wasn't breaking out from all the grease in the kitchen. And all of that. So it was really fun. This manager pulled me aside, and well, I had gone, when I got this job, how you get the job is you put on a tie. For guys, I don't know I don't know how the girls had to dress up, but and I say guys and girls because we were in high school at the time. But I don't know how everyone else did it, but you'd wear a tie, you'd go apply for the job, and then you keep going back and you'd ask the manager, do you have any openings? And eventually Dave Hansen, who had been the manager for at least one of my brothers, maybe both, at another store, he said that he would offer me a job. It was great. My dream would come true. I'm set for success for the rest of my life because I got this bagger job at Alpha Beta. And so they sent me to this training. It was a 2-hour training. They actually had videotape as a part of it, which was pretty unique back in 1979. And one of the things they emphasized was it's better to be, it's not accurate, but it's better to get the things in the bag right than it is to be fast. And I took that to heart. And I went back to work. And after a couple of weeks, the manager pulled me aside. And what he informed me was, while it is more important to be accurate, speed is okay. Speed is something that is important. And he didn't say it that way, though. What devastated me was he said, Steve, you're the worst bagger I've ever seen. But then, and his name was Chester, by the way. So I don't know what has gone on with his life. He was an assistant manager. He was the night manager, and he was going to college to Cal Poly Pomona to be a business major. He gave me terrible advice later on in life because I bought a Volkswagen for more than, it was a 13-year-old car, and I bought it for more than it sold originally. He just says, you never do that. And I'm like, Chester, you're a business major. Have you heard of inflation? And classic cars. Anyway, he said I was the worst bagger he'd ever seen, but then he told me why. And it was because of the speed that I wasn't showing. And I had kind of set the speed aside, but I was making all the checkers angry because all the stuff. And if you're watching baggers now, you probably can't relate, because I look at them and I'm thinking, man, they never had a Chester in their life to tell them how slow they are. But yeah, all the food would pile up there and the checkers would have to help me bag to get the people out of there. And the lines would get longer when I was there, and they were tired of having to do my job for me. So Chester, in a sense, was a hero. Now, I don't think I was the worst bagger he had ever seen. I saw other baggers there after I had that feedback, and they were way worse than I was. There was one who didn't last very long. So there were clearly more that were worse than I was, even in that moment. The thing was, I didn't want to be in that conversation. When you bring up the worst bagger I've ever seen, I don't want anybody to think Steve Gardner. So I was pretty motivated by that. Plus, I wanted to keep that job because, like I said, it made me rich. And I ended up staying. I was a good bagger. I don't know if it's not like I became the best, but it wasn't like there was a competition. There wasn't a TV reality show where they try to trick grocery baggers into doing the best job in that. All I know is I was good enough to get promoted after I graduated from high school. I ended up staying with that company for 2 years and 4 months, and it would be 24 years before I ever had another job that lasted that long, more than 2 years. The Kitsap Sun was what broke that string. And I ended up staying there for 13 years. The best report, no. Anyway, and I owe a lot of that to Chester, because he not only told me something that was difficult to hear, and it hurt. I mean, when I get told something like that, I feel it. right about here. I'm pointing just below my heart, and it stings. It hurts. Years later, I was in a training, and I've hesitated somewhat to tell this part of this story, because not because it's not a decent story, but because I may be breaking some ground rules by revealing something that I shouldn't reveal, because I'd made an agreement not to reveal what happens in this training, but I'm gonna take that risk tonight. We were sent out, it was a personal development training, and we were going to dinner, and on our dinner, we were supposed to break bread with somebody we didn't know. The rules were they had to be somebody who could get away from us. And it had to be an adult, not necessarily an adult. It had to be somebody who was, conscious, not a kid, but, it could have been a teenager just fine. And so a group of us, we went to this mall, because that's what you do when you're given a challenge to go accost people. And I've had an experience since then where years ago, some guy came up and talked to me, and I was having this great conversation. At the end of it, he invited me to his church, and it was kind of a letdown to realize that was the point all along. At any rate, we went to this mall, and I walked in, and there was a caramel corn store on right at the entrance that we went in. And I said, well, okay, I'm going to go buy some caramel corn. I'm going to find somebody that's going to want some of this. And I walk away from the caramel corn store. Remember, I'm supposed to break bread with somebody I don't know. And this girl walks up to me and says, would you mind sharing some of that? And I'm like, well, sure. And so she took some and said, thank you. And that was the extent of the thing. And if you're a person who believes in meeting the letter of the law, I met the letter of the law of that challenge, but I knew that I hadn't stretched to myself. And in the context of that training, there's other things that had happened in that training. I hadn't done enough. And so I went around the mall, and I kind of hesitated for a while, and I finally ended up winding up and talking to a guy, and we had a nice conversation, and I offered him some of the caramel corn, and he said, no, thank you. Very nice guy, didn't want any. And so we left. I felt like I hadn't fulfilled the challenge. And so when I went back, the trainer, her name was Eleanor, she went around and she was asking everybody if, met the challenge, and most people had. Looked at me, and I was like, no. And there was some context to this, but she said, she went forward, and then she stopped, and she looked at me, and she says, you have no idea how much you rip people off when you refuse to show up and be a leader. And with both of these people, with Chester and with Eleanor, I can say, if they hadn't been, those were harsh. Those were hard to hear. But I can tell you, and I'm not inviting it, I'm not necessarily telling everybody come at me with it, but I can tell you that those are two of the most powerful messages I've ever heard. I remember the worst bag I've ever seen. That isn't necessarily useful, but it's memorable. And I remember the moment that I challenged myself to get better. With her, it has reminded me to go after things, not just because it's going to benefit me, but because maybe it can make a difference in somebody else's life. So I've been moved by hearing hard things, and those two people are heroes to me.